Miss Lang. We're going to talk real quick about the New Deal and the Great Depression. What I want you to remember is that, yes, this is world history. So the Great Depression was a worldwide depression, but because we're in the United States, because that's where we're going for next year and STAR testing, we are going to only look at it from the United States perspective. So stock market crash 1929. We know the 1920s were some of the most prosperous years in the United States. October of 1929, the stock market begins to crash. Prices have been inflated from over speculation, people putting money into the market that they didn't really have. All of that creates Black Tuesday, Black Thursday. Stocks plummet. People go to the banks to try to get money out, and those banks are depleted. They've got no money to give. There are billions of dollars lost in just a single day. Bank failures, again, fear of closing. Everybody runs to the bank. You guys can see the line here in this picture. Everybody runs to the bank. Every penny they've put in, they would like to take out. Unfortunately, for a handful of the folks, even in this picture, by the time they got to the window, the bank would have been out of cash. There was no insurance. Nothing protected your money when you put it in a bank. You were at the mercy of the bank, meaning that when the banks closed and were out of money, you were never going to see your money again from that bank. Thousands of banks across the United States close as they run out of funding. A couple of pictures just to kind of give you a feel of what life was like. You guys can see like poor man's store. This is like a grain sack, probably for flour, maybe rice. And then obviously some children kind of looking longingly probably at produce that their parents can't provide for them right now. In terms of job loss, free coffee and donuts. You guys can see all the men and women waiting in line. They don't have jobs, but they can get a cup of coffee. Using kids to try to get jobs for their parents. And then many men would hop on trains and go to the next town, further and further west, trying to find jobs. And so some cities came up with signs, billboards similar to this that said, jobless men, don't get off at this stop. We don't have any jobs either. Basically telling them, keep moving. We don't have jobs for you here. New heroes hit the stage. Bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde. Kind of think Robin Hood. They'd steal from the rich, give to the poor. John Dillinger also. Unemployment rates, you guys can see from 1929, we were under 5%. And then by the mid-30s, we're up into the 20s, getting really close to into the 30s. And then we don't really recover that much all the way through 1939. President Herbert Hoover is the president when the Great Depression strikes, but he is a laissez-faire president. He does not believe in big government and really kind of thinks every man for himself. If you overextended yourself, then you're going to feel the burden of those decisions. So he doesn't really do anything. He remains kind of hands-off, assuming that because of the way an economic system works, this was the low, so to be followed by an increase in another high. But his lack of assistance leads to a new president. 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, wins that election. He is a Democrat from New York. You guys can see in the picture on the right there that he is in a wheelchair. He suffered from polio as a child, and so he was paralyzed and wasn't able to walk. He promises the American people that happier days are here again. He gives an outstanding State of the Union address, probably one of the most iconic State of the Union addresses, and includes the quote, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, in terms of the Great Depression. He starts planning his first 100 days. So when he takes office in January, the first 100 days, he is going to plow through ideas, sending them into Congress to try to get some new things set up to help the American people. He calls all of his reforms, all of his changes, he calls them a New Deal. It's a I don't know, we call it, I guess, in U.S. history, an alphabet soup. Lots of acronyms, lots of new ideas that the United States has really never seen before. He takes a huge step in terms of government being involved in the day-to-day lives of average Americans. He calls for three things, the three R's: relief, recovery, and reform. In doing that, he also makes himself more personable by hosting a radio show. They were called Fireside Chats, and literally people would sit, in their living rooms listening to the radio, and President Roosevelt would get on the radio and try to explain some of his programs and some of his legislation to the average man. Because what's happening in Washington, oftentimes the everyday man doesn't really know what some of those things mean. And so he wanted to come into people's homes and say, here's what it's going to look like for you, which, as you can imagine, was really, really popular. Relief programs were meant to help right now, get people the help they need immediately. This included both money and support. And some of the programs included a bank holiday. He closed banks across the United States to give them a chance to catch up. And then he created the Federal Emergency Relief Administration that helped put some money back in the pockets of the average man. His recovery programs were temporary jobs and programs that he created to create jobs and try to lower the unemployment rate. A lot of these restarted demand, because you can't buy things if you don't have money. So he put together programs that would pay government money to people to go do jobs. Some of those programs, WPA, what's really cool about the WPA, if you go to our admin building here in Decatur, you'll see a plaque, our admin building, so I think it's the original high school here in Decatur, is a works progress administration project. It was one of the buildings that the government paid people to go to work. And they built that school because it was parks, it was roads, it was all the things that everybody could use. It was good for the public. But again, it was government funds that put money in everybody's pockets. And then his reform programs, these were things that meant to change the laws, change the way that we did things so that something like the Great Depression could never happen again. They were permanent. And again, we didn't want the 1930s to happen on that scale again. FDIC, that what protects our money in the bank. Social Security, obviously that protects the elderly. NLRB, SEC is big. Securities Exchange, it kind of regulates the stock market. You can't put money in the market if you don't have actual money. You can't say, well, I'm going to make money, let me buy stock now. You actually have to have it to buy it. And then to add a little insult to injury, we've got the Dust Bowl, 1935, when unemployment, everything's at its worst. We also have the Dust Bowl that hits the central part of the United States. It causes drought, over-farming, huge dust storms spread across the United States. We've overused the land. We haven't let it rest. The topsoil is shot, which means that as soon as those windstorms come through, it takes all of the sand with it and blows it around in huge walls of dust. You guys can see the most heavily impacted areas. So yes, part of Texas, that upper part of the Panhandle, but not so much where we are in North Texas. Another picture of the dust storm. This is April 14th, so not too long ago, but in 1935. But you guys can see that, I mean, that's just dust. It's not clouds. That is a huge dust storm. The second New Deal, FDR is obviously reelected. He helps a lot of Americans, and so he easily is reelected. He begins his second New Deal, more programs, more trying to get money into people's hands, lower unemployment rate, put people back to work, increase demand. But everything that's good, we know, can also be bad, right? So FDR does also take some criticism. He does increase the role of government. which if we go all the way back to the beginning of the United States when we wrote the original Constitution, the whole idea was this balance between federal government and state government. And so FDR took a lot of criticism saying that the federal government was overstepping their boundaries, that the federal government should not have that much role in our day-to-day life. It also started deficit spending, so the government spending money that the government didn't have, getting us, I don't want to say for the first time in the red, but it's where we still function today. We spend money that we don't necessarily have. The legacy, government takes on a larger role in people's lives. It created programs like Medicare and Medicaid. We've already talked about Social Security, the things that protect us when something really, really bad happens to us. It provides kind of a security and a safety net at the federal level, and that was something that we had never had in the United States before. Many of those programs we know still exist today, but if we could flip all the way back to that unemployment chart, we do not fully recover from the Great Depression until we're kind of forced into World War II. That jump starts our economy. It puts everybody back to work. And so the New Deal alone didn't pull us out of the Great Depression. It certainly helped, but really World War II is what's going to be credited for bringing us out of the Great Depression. So now I want you to look through your lecture questions. Obviously, you can use the slides, the PowerPoint, this lecture while you're answering those. These videos down here, there's 3 of them. They're awesome. One about the Roaring '20s, one about the Great Depression, and then one that gives a little bit more information about the Dust Bowl. All 3 of them are great, so if you've got 5 minutes, I highly recommend that you watch those. And then something to look forward to, hopefully. Next week, we will start talking about World War II. And when we talk about World War II, again, we'll go back and look at it a little bit more globally before we focus in on the United States role. Hope you guys are doing well. We miss you. Let us know if you have any questions. And we hope that we will see you back in August.